"Ma'am, I'm going to need you to empty your bag. Right here, right now." The words cut clean through the warm afternoon air, sharp enough to make a few heads turn before anyone even understood why. Deputy Ryan Cole didn't raise his voice, but he didn't need to. Authority lived in the way he stood, shoulders squared, one hand resting near his belt, the other already reaching toward the worn leather strap of the elderly woman's handbag. Evelyn Brooks paused mid-step on the sidewalk, the late sunlight catching the silver strands of her hair as a soft breeze moved through them. At 72, she carried herself with a quiet steadiness, the kind that came from years of standing beside hospital beds, listening to heart monitors, and holding hands when words weren't enough. Her fingers, slightly bent from arthritis, tightened gently around the handle of her bag, not in defiance, but in instinct. Around them, the street shifted. Conversations lowered, footsteps slowed. The low hum of traffic seemed to dull as people glanced over, curiosity pulling their attention like a thread. A man near a food truck stopped mid-order, a woman across the street lowered her sunglasses, and somewhere behind them, a phone was quietly lifted, its camera already recording. Ryan didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't care. His gaze stayed fixed on Evelyn, steady, unblinking, already certain. "We've had reports," he added, his tone controlled, practiced, the kind that left little room for questions. Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes calm, not wide with fear, not hardened with anger, just present. There was a stillness in her expression that didn't match the tension gathering around them. She took a slow breath, the kind she had taught anxious patients for decades. Inhale, hold, exhale, and the faint rise and fall of her chest seemed almost deliberate against the tightening moment. "Reports can be wrong," she said softly, her voice steady enough that it didn't tremble, but quiet enough that people had to lean in to hear it. Ryan's jaw tightened just slightly, a flicker of something, impatience, maybe, passing through his posture. He stepped closer, closing the small gap between them, his shadow stretching over her shoes. "Then this won't take long," he replied, reaching again, this time closer to the clasp of her bag. The leather creaked faintly under the pressure of his hand, a small sound that seemed louder than it should have been. Evelyn didn't pull away. She didn't step back. She simply stood there, grounded, as if the concrete beneath her feet had roots. The breeze shifted again, carrying the distant scent of roasted peanuts from a nearby cart, mixing strangely with the tension that now hung in the air. Somewhere, a car horn sounded, distant and irrelevant. The world hadn't stopped, but here, in this small circle of attention, it felt like it had. Evelyn's eyes moved briefly, not to escape, but to take in the edges of the moment, the people watching, the phones raised, the reflection of glass storefronts catching everything. Then she looked back at him. "You should be careful what you think you see," she said, just above a whisper. And for the briefest second, something in the air shifted, not louder, not softer, just heavier, as if the moment itself was waiting for something neither of them had said yet. The leather of the bag gave a faint sigh as Evelyn slowly loosened her grip, not in surrender, but in deliberate choice, her fingers uncurling one by one, as if she were placing something fragile down rather than letting it go. Up close, the details of her hands told a quiet story. Thin veins beneath soft brown skin, small ridges shaped by decades of work, of lifting, of caring, of holding on to things that mattered longer than most people noticed. Ryan's hand hovered for a second before taking the strap fully, his movements controlled, practiced, yet carrying a trace of impatience that leaked through in the tightening of his jaw. The crowd had grown without anyone announcing it, drawn in by the gravity of the moment, a circle forming at a respectful distance, not close enough to intervene, but close enough to witness. A teenager on a skateboard rolled to a stop at the curb, one foot planted on the pavement, his phone angled slightly upward. A middle-aged man in a button-down shirt folded his arms, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, as if unsure whether he was watching something routine or something that would matter later. Evelyn stood with her shoulders relaxed, her posture neither defensive nor submissive, simply steady. The sunlight reflected faintly off the glass windows behind her, casting a soft glow that framed her outline, almost as if the world refused to dim her presence even in this moment. "Go ahead," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach him, but not the crowd. There was no edge in it, no challenge, only a calm that did not ask for permission. Ryan exhaled through his nose, a small breath that barely moved his chest, and opened the bag. The zipper slid back with a soft metallic sound, and for a brief second, everything seemed to pause around that single motion. Inside, there was no rush of hidden items, no sudden reveal, only the quiet contents of an ordinary life. A folded receipt, edges softened from being handled more than once. A small pill organizer labeled with days of the week, each compartment carefully marked. A pair of reading glasses resting in a worn case, the hinge slightly loose. Ryan began to lift each item out, one at a time, placing them on the flat surface of a nearby bench as if arranging evidence, though nothing about them felt like it belonged in that category. The pill organizer clicked faintly as it touched the bench, the sound echoing more than it should have. Evelyn watched, her gaze following his hands, not with suspicion, but with a quiet attentiveness, the same look she might have given a nurse learning a new procedure for the first time. "You carry a lot for a short trip," Ryan muttered, not quite looking at her, his tone edged with something between skepticism and justification. Evelyn's lips pressed together gently, not in disapproval, but in thought. "When you have lived long enough," she replied, "you learn to be prepared for more than you expect." A light breeze moved through again, lifting the corner of the receipt on the bench, fluttering it slightly before it settled back down. The small details of the moment seemed to stretch, each second holding longer than usual, as if the air itself was waiting. Somewhere behind them, a door opened and closed, the sound distant, detached from the tension here. Ryan reached deeper into the bag, his movements slower now, more deliberate, as if searching for something that would justify the certainty he had carried into this moment. But each item he touched felt ordinary, grounded, real in a way that did not match the narrative forming in his mind. Evelyn shifted her weight slightly, the subtle movement of someone who knew how to stand for long periods without showing discomfort. Her eyes lifted briefly past him, catching the reflection in the storefront glass again, the quiet presence of those watching, the silent witnesses holding the moment in place. Then she looked back at him, her voice softer now, almost reflective. "Sometimes what we expect says more about us than what we find." And for a fraction of a second, his hands paused inside the bag, as if the words had reached somewhere he had not planned to open. Ryan's fingers remained inside the bag a moment longer than necessary, not because there was more to find, but because there was less than he expected, and that absence carried a weight he had not prepared for. Slowly, he withdrew his hand, bringing out a final item, a small, folded photograph tucked carefully into an inner pocket, its edges worn but protected as if it mattered more than anything else in the bag. He hesitated before unfolding it, the movement subtle, almost reluctant, as though some part of him already sensed it would not confirm what he believed. The paper made a soft crackle as it opened, revealing an image faded slightly with time, but still clear enough to tell its story. A younger Evelyn stood in a hospital hallway, dressed in light blue scrubs, her hair darker then, her posture the same steady calm she carried now. Beside her, a small child sat in a wheelchair, smiling wide, one hand resting in hers. The fluorescent lights above them cast a pale glow, and behind them, a whiteboard filled with names and times marked the rhythm of a place where every second mattered. Ryan stared at the photograph longer than he intended, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the life captured in that moment. Around them, the crowd leaned in without moving closer, their attention tightening, the silence deepening as if even the air had decided not to interrupt. A car passed slowly down the street, its engine low, almost respectful, and then the sound faded, leaving only the faint rustle of fabric and the distant hum of the city. "Where did you get this?" he asked, though the question came out quieter than before, lacking the sharp edge it once carried. Evelyn's gaze shifted to the photograph in his hands, her expression unchanged, but something softer flickered beneath it, not pride, not sadness, something more grounded. "That was taken about 30 years ago," she said, her voice steady, the rhythm of it familiar, like someone used to explaining things patiently. "That little boy could not breathe on his own when I first met him." Ryan's thumb brushed lightly against the corner of the photo, not enough to smudge it, just enough to feel its texture, the reality of it. "And now?" he asked, almost without thinking. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, the smallest movement, but it carried a quiet certainty. "Now he is a firefighter in this city," she replied. The words settled into the space between them, not dramatic, not raised, but undeniable. A few people in the crowd exchanged glances, subtle shifts of posture, as if something inside the moment had begun to realign. Ryan folded the photograph back carefully, more carefully than he had unfolded it, and placed it on the bench beside the other items. His movements had slowed, not out of caution, but out of something closer to awareness, though he did not fully recognize it yet. He looked back into the bag once more, his hand hovering over its empty interior, the lining clean, the space holding nothing more than what had already been revealed. No hidden compartments, no overlooked items, just the quiet truth of what was there. The certainty he had carried at the beginning of the encounter now felt different, not gone, but unsettled, like something shifted slightly off balance. Evelyn adjusted her stance just enough to ease the pressure on her knees, the movement small but deliberate, her composure unbroken. Her eyes met his again, not searching, not accusing, simply present. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked, her tone unchanged, the question simple on the surface, yet carrying something deeper beneath it. Ryan did not answer immediately. His gaze moved from the bag, to the items on the bench, to the reflection in the glass behind her, where the gathered crowd stood like silent witnesses, their phones still raised, capturing every second. For the first time since he had stepped into her path, the situation no longer felt contained within his control. It felt observed, recorded, fixed in a way that extended beyond the moment itself. A faint sound came from somewhere above them, almost easy to miss, the soft mechanical hum of a security camera adjusting its angle, its lens catching the light as it turned, steady and indifferent. Ryan's eyes flicked upward briefly, just for a second, but long enough for something to register, something he had not accounted for when he first spoke. And though nothing had been said yet, the air around them shifted again, heavier now, as if the truth had not only been found, but was about to be seen. The faint mechanical hum from above lingered in Ryan's ears longer than it should have, like a sound that refused to be ignored once noticed. His gaze returned downward, but something in his posture had shifted, subtle yet undeniable, the rigid certainty in his shoulders loosening just enough to feel unfamiliar. He cleared his throat quietly, not as a command this time, but almost as if he needed to reset the moment. "Stay right here," he said, though the authority in his voice had softened, no longer cutting through the air the way it had before. Evelyn did not move. She did not need to. She had been standing in the same place the entire time, grounded in a way that did not depend on permission. Her eyes followed him briefly as he reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder, the small device catching the sunlight as he pressed the button. "Dispatch, can you confirm any recent reports matching this description?" he asked, his tone measured, controlled, but now threaded with something less certain. The static crackled softly before a voice responded, distant and routine, asking for clarification. Ryan glanced at Evelyn, then away, scanning the street as if seeing it for the first time beyond the narrow frame he had chosen earlier. Elderly female, brown coat, carrying a leather bag. He continued, each word slower than the last, as though he were carefully reconstructing the situation rather than asserting it. There was a pause on the line, longer than expected, filled only by the faint background noise of traffic and distant voices. Around them, the crowd remained still, their presence no longer curious but attentive, invested. A man near the edge lowered his phone slightly, only to raise it again, adjusting his angle. A woman whispered something to the person beside her, her voice barely audible, then fell silent again. The air felt tighter now, not with tension, but with anticipation, like a moment suspended just before something irreversible. Evelyn shifted her gaze upward again, just briefly, toward the camera mounted above the storefront. The lens remained fixed, steady, capturing everything without judgment, without interruption. She had seen cameras like that before, in hospital corridors, in waiting rooms, silent witnesses to moments both ordinary and life-changing. Her breathing remained even, slow, controlled, the rhythm of someone who understood how to remain calm when others could not. Ryan lowered the radio slightly, waiting, his thumb resting near the button as if unsure whether to press it again. His eyes moved across the items on the bench, lingering on the pill organizer, the folded receipt, the photograph now resting flat and still. Each object felt heavier than before, not because of what they were, but because of what they were not. There was no evidence of wrongdoing, no confirmation of suspicion, only the quiet reality of a life lived with care and intention. The radio crackled again, sharper this time, pulling his attention back. Negative on that description, the voice said. However, we do have an active report from a nearby store. Suspect is a male, mid-30s, gray hoodie, last seen heading east. The words landed with a weight that did not need to be explained. Ryan's grip on the radio tightened slightly, his knuckles faintly paling before he released the button. For a moment, he did not move. He did not speak. The information hung between him and Evelyn, filling the space where certainty had once lived. A car passed slowly behind the crowd, its reflection sliding across the glass storefront, briefly distorting the scene before settling again. Evelyn's eyes remained on him, not accusing, not triumphant, simply present. The same quiet steadiness she had carried from the beginning had not changed, as if she had been waiting not for him to prove her wrong, but for the truth to arrive on its own. Ryan inhaled slowly, the breath deeper this time, and for the first time since the moment began, he seemed to feel the full weight of where he was standing, not just in the street, but in front of every eye, every lens, every silent witness that had captured the path he had chosen. The camera above did not move. It did not need to. It had already seen everything. Ryan's hand remained still at his side, the radio now silent, its earlier crackle replaced by a quiet that felt heavier than any noise. The words from dispatch did not echo, they settled, sinking into the moment with a finality that could not be undone. For a second, he looked as if he might speak, as if he might reshape what had just been confirmed, but nothing came. His gaze drifted past Evelyn, past the small crowd, toward the east end of the street where the real suspect had already disappeared into the flow of the city, unseen, unchecked. The distance between where he stood and where he should have been seemed to stretch wider with every passing second. Behind him, a voice from the crowd spoke just loud enough to be heard, not confrontational, not aggressive, just factual. That is not her. It was a simple sentence, but it carried weight, not because of how it was said, but because of when it was said. A few others shifted, their agreement not spoken, but visible in the way they held themselves, the way their attention remained fixed, no longer uncertain. Evelyn did not react to the voice. She did not need confirmation from the crowd. Her hands rested calmly at her sides, her shoulders relaxed, her presence unchanged. The breeze moved again, brushing lightly against her coat, lifting it just enough to reveal the careful stitching along the hem, a quiet detail that spoke of time, of care, of things kept and valued. On the bench, her belongings remained where Ryan had placed them, arranged in a line that now felt less like evidence and more like a quiet display of truth. The pill organizer sat closed, each day sealed, untouched. The receipt lay flat, its ink faint but legible. The photograph remained still, its image holding a past that could not be questioned. Ryan took a step back, not large, not sudden, just enough to create space where there had been none before. The movement was small, but it changed everything. The invisible line he had drawn between authority and accusation shifted, no longer fixed, no longer certain. His eyes dropped briefly to the ground, then lifted again, but this time they did not carry the same weight. They searched, not for proof, but for understanding, though it came too late to change what had already unfolded. A faint sound of sirens passed somewhere in the distance, unrelated, indifferent, a reminder that the world continued beyond this moment, even as this moment refused to release its hold. The camera above remained steady, its lens capturing every detail, every hesitation, every second that stretched longer than expected. Evelyn bent slightly at the waist, slow and deliberate, her movements careful as she reached toward the bench. She picked up the photograph first, smoothing it gently with her fingers before folding it along its worn crease. Then the receipt, then the glasses, each item returned to its place with the same quiet care she had carried from the beginning. She did not rush. There was no urgency in her actions, only intention. Ryan watched her, his hands now empty, no longer reaching, no longer directing. The authority that had once filled his posture now seemed uncertain, as if it had nowhere to stand. When Evelyn finally lifted the bag again, the leather strap settling into her palm, she paused for a brief moment, not because she needed to, but because the moment itself required it. Her eyes met his once more, steady, clear, not hardened, not softened, simply present. "Sometimes," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach him, "what we choose to see can cost more than we realize." The words did not accuse. They did not demand. They simply existed, undeniable, like everything else that had unfolded. Ryan did not respond. He could not. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, filled with everything that had been seen, everything that had been assumed, and everything that could no longer be denied. And as Evelyn straightened, her posture unchanged, her dignity intact, the weight of the moment did not lift. It remained, settling over the street, over the crowd, over him, like something that would not be forgotten. The moment did not break all at once. It loosened, slowly, like a held breath finally released across the street. The crowd did not rush forward or step in. They simply shifted, their weight moving from one foot to the other, the quiet understanding passing between them without words. A few phones lowered, not because the moment was over, but because it had already been captured, already fixed in a way that no one could undo. The sunlight had softened now, angling lower between the buildings, casting long reflections across the glass and pavement, turning ordinary surfaces into mirrors that held fragments of what had just happened. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, the leather settling comfortably against her side, familiar, steady. Her movements remained unhurried, each one measured, as if she refused to let the pace of the moment dictate the rhythm of her body. She took a small step forward, then another, not away in retreat, but forward in continuation, as if the path she had been walking before all of this had simply resumed. Ryan did not move immediately. His boots remained planted where they had been, the distance between them now defined not by control, but by what had already passed between them. His eyes followed her for a moment, not sharply, not critically, but with a quiet attention that felt new, unfamiliar. The radio at his shoulder remained silent, its earlier authority replaced by stillness. He reached up and adjusted it slightly, a small gesture, almost reflexive, but it did not restore what had shifted inside him. A breeze passed again, cooler now, carrying the faint scent of pavement warming under the late afternoon sun, mixing with the distant sounds of the city returning to its usual rhythm. A car door closed somewhere behind the crowd, footsteps resumed, conversations began again in low tones, but nothing fully erased the imprint of the moment that had just settled over the space. Evelyn paused briefly at the edge of the sidewalk, just before stepping off the curb. The traffic light across the street blinked from red to green, the signal soft but steady, and she waited, not because she had to, but because she always had. Habit, patience, respect for rhythm, the kind learned over a lifetime of moving through spaces where timing mattered. Her eyes lifted once more, not toward Ryan this time, but toward the reflection in the glass storefront beside her. For a second, she saw the scene from the outside, the figures, the distance, the quiet aftermath. Then she looked forward again. Ryan finally shifted, one step backward, then another, the movement subtle but clear. It was not retreat in fear, but a repositioning, as if he no longer belonged at the center of what had unfolded. His hand brushed lightly against the edge of the bench where her belongings had rested moments before, the surface now empty, smooth, holding no trace except memory. He glanced upward again, just briefly, toward the camera fixed above, its lens unchanged, impartial, still watching even as nothing more was happening. That was the part he could not move away from. Not the crowd, not the street, not even Evelyn walking calmly toward the crosswalk, but the quiet certainty that what had happened was no longer contained within this moment. It existed elsewhere now, recorded, undeniable, waiting. Evelyn stepped forward as the signal allowed, her shoes touching the painted lines of the crosswalk, her pace steady, her posture unchanged. She did not look back. She did not need to. The space behind her remained filled with Everything that had been revealed, everything that had been assumed, and everything that could no longer be ignored. Ryan stood where he was, the distance between them widening with each step she took, not just in space, but in understanding. And as the light shifted again, casting her figure in a softer glow as she crossed, the silence that remained around him was no longer empty. It was reflective, heavy with a truth that had arrived quietly, but would not leave. Evelyn reached the other side of the street with the same steady rhythm she had carried from the beginning, her steps even, her posture upright, as if nothing about the last few minutes had altered the way she moved through the world. The crosswalk signal began to count down behind her, the soft electronic ticking marking time that no longer felt the same for the man still standing across from her. Ryan remained near the curb, his figure now slightly offset from where the moment had started, no longer centered, no longer in control of the narrative that had unfolded. A low murmur moved through the crowd, not loud, not chaotic, but layered, voices overlapping in quiet acknowledgement. Some people began to step away, returning to their routines, while others lingered just a moment longer, their eyes still drawn back to him, to the space where authority had shifted into something else entirely. A man in a baseball cap glanced up at the camera mounted above the storefront, then back at Ryan, the connection unspoken but understood. The lens remained fixed, but its presence now felt larger, as if it had expanded beyond the frame of metal and glass into something that could not be dismissed. Ryan exhaled slowly, the breath deeper than any he had taken before, his chest rising and falling with a weight that did not come from exertion, but from realization. He turned slightly, his gaze following the direction Evelyn had taken, and for the first time, he saw not just a figure walking away, but the distance created by every assumption he had made without pause. The street between them was not wide, barely 30 feet from curb to curb, but it felt vast, filled with everything he had overlooked. A faint reflection caught his eye in the storefront window beside him, his own image staring back, uniform crisp, badge still shining under the afternoon light, but something in the posture no longer matched the confidence it once carried. The reflection did not accuse, it revealed. Behind him, a quiet voice spoke again, different from before, softer, almost reflective. That is going to be seen. Ryan did not turn to see who had said it. He did not need to. The statement settled into him with the same certainty as the radio call earlier, undeniable, already true. His hand moved instinctively toward his belt, then stopped midway, hovering for a moment before lowering again, as if the gesture no longer served a purpose. Across the street, Evelyn paused briefly near the corner, adjusting the strap of her bag once more, her movements small, precise, unchanged. She looked down the block, then ahead, her focus already beyond the moment she had left behind. The world continued to open in front of her, not waiting, not slowing, simply moving forward as it always had. Ryan took a step toward the crosswalk, then stopped, the hesitation subtle but visible, as if something inside him was no longer certain where to go next. The sound of traffic resumed fully now, engines passing, tires rolling over asphalt, the city reclaiming its rhythm, but the space around him remained different, quieter in a way that did not depend on sound. He glanced upward once more, his eyes catching the camera again, its lens unchanged, unblinking. That was where the shift truly settled, not in the crowd, not in the words exchanged, but in the knowledge that this moment existed beyond him now, outside his control, preserved exactly as it had happened. Evelyn continued down the sidewalk, her figure gradually blending into the movement of the city, not disappearing, but becoming part of something larger, something that did not need to announce itself to be understood. Ryan stood still for one more second, then another, the silence around him no longer empty, but filled with a realization that did not need to be spoken aloud. And as the light shifted once more, softening the edges of everything it touched, the truth did not arrive suddenly. It settled, quiet and complete, leaving him standing in a moment that would not move with him, no matter how far he walked. Ryan finally moved, not with urgency, not with command, but with a measured step that felt unfamiliar in his own body. He crossed the street slowly, the painted white lines beneath his boots marking each step as deliberate, each movement carrying the weight of something he had not fully named yet. The traffic had paused for him, as it always did, but this time it did not feel like authority clearing the way. It felt like space being given for something unfinished. Evelyn had not gone far. She stood near the corner, just past a small storefront with a faded awning, her gaze resting down the block as if she had already returned to her day. When she heard his footsteps approach, she did not turn immediately. She allowed the sound to arrive first, steady, unhurried, before she shifted her head slightly, acknowledging his presence without reacting to it. Ryan stopped a few feet behind her, the distance respectful now, not imposed. For a moment, he said nothing. The city moved around them, a bus passing in the distance, the low rumble of its engine blending into the rhythm of the street. People walking past without stopping, the moment no longer a spectacle, but still not entirely gone. He drew a breath, deeper than before, the kind that required intention. "Ma'am," he began, but the word did not carry the same tone it had earlier. It was quieter, less certain, as if he was choosing it carefully rather than using it automatically. Evelyn turned then, slowly, her eyes meeting his with the same calm presence she had held from the start. There was no expectation in her expression, no demand for what came next, only a quiet openness that did not rush him forward. Ryan's gaze lowered briefly, not in avoidance, but in search of the right place to stand within himself. "I made an assumption," he said, each word spaced, deliberate, as if he needed to feel them before letting them go. The sentence hung there, simple, but heavy with everything it carried. Evelyn did not interrupt. She did not nod. She simply listened. He continued, his voice steady but stripped of its earlier edge. "I did not take the time to see what was actually in front of me." The admission did not come easily, but once spoken, it did not retreat. It remained present, like the moment itself. A faint breeze moved between them, lifting the edge of her coat again, soft, almost imperceptible. Evelyn's hands rested lightly against the strap of her bag, her fingers still, grounded. "That happens," she said quietly, her voice neither forgiving nor condemning, just acknowledging. Ryan looked up at her then, fully, as if seeing her without interruption for the first time. "It should not," he replied, the words softer now, more reflective than defensive. Evelyn studied him for a brief second, not searching for apology, not measuring sincerity, simply observing. "But it does," she said, and in that simple exchange, something shifted again, not in the space around them, but in the space within him. Ryan nodded once, the movement small, but real. His shoulders eased slightly, not from relief, but from recognition. "I am sorry," he said, the words clear, unforced, without embellishment. They did not try to undo what had happened. They did not try to explain it away. They simply existed as they were meant to. Evelyn held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod of her own, not as acceptance, not as closure, but as acknowledgement that the words had been heard. She adjusted her bag again, the motion familiar, steady, then turned back toward the street ahead. Ryan did not follow. He remained where he was, watching as she resumed her walk, her pace unchanged, her presence intact. The distance between them grew again, but this time it did not feel like separation. It felt like something understood. Behind him, the camera still watched, silent, unblinking, holding the moment not as accusation, but as record. And as Evelyn moved forward into the flow of the city, and Ryan remained standing in the space where everything had shifted, the quiet that followed was no longer heavy. It was clear. Evelyn's figure moved steadily down the block until she became just another part of the city's rhythm, her presence blending into the quiet flow of people, storefront reflections, and late afternoon light that stretched long across the pavement. Nothing about her pace changed, nothing about her posture shifted, and yet everything she carried remained visible in the way she moved, composed, grounded, untouched by the moment that had tried to define her. The city did not stop for her, and she did not ask it to. She simply continued, step after step, the soft sound of her shoes meeting the sidewalk fading gradually into the background noise of passing cars and distant voices. Behind her, Ryan remained where he stood, the space around him now open, no longer framed by a crowd, no longer held together by tension. People had dispersed, some already turning corners, others stepping into shops, their attention returning to the routines they had paused. But the absence of witnesses did not empty the moment. It left it clearer. The storefront glass beside him reflected his figure once more, but this time he did not look away. He stood still, facing it, his own image returning his gaze without distortion, without interruption. The badge on his chest still caught the light, still carried the same shape, the same shine, but it no longer felt like the center of what he was seeing. His shoulders lowered slightly, the rigid lines softening, not from exhaustion, but from understanding. The radio at his shoulder remained quiet, its silence now more present than any command it had carried earlier. A faint breeze moved through the street again, lifting small bits of dust along the curb, shifting the edge of a loose paper near a trash can, subtle movements that marked time without urgency. Ryan exhaled slowly, the breath steady, measured, as if he were aligning himself with something he had not noticed before. His eyes lifted once more, not searching, not scanning, but simply observing, taking in the street as it was, not as he had assumed it to be. The camera above the storefront remained fixed, its lens unchanged, still watching, still holding the moment in quiet permanence. It did not judge, it did not speak, but it ensured that what had happened would not be reshaped by memory or perspective. It would remain as it was, exact, undeniable. Ryan turned slightly, his gaze following the direction Evelyn had taken, though she was no longer visible. The distance between them could not be measured now in feet or steps, but in something less tangible, something that had shifted within him rather than between them. He adjusted his stance, the movement small, grounding, and for a moment he simply stood there, not as someone directing the moment, but as someone standing inside it. The sounds of the city continued to rise and fall around him, steady, familiar, unchanged, yet everything within that soundscape felt different, as if it carried a quiet awareness he had not recognized before. A car passed slowly, its reflection sliding across the glass again, briefly overlapping with his own image before moving on. The lights softened further, the edges of buildings and shadows blending into a gentler tone as the day moved forward. Ryan took one step, then another, not in pursuit, not in retreat, but simply moving, rejoining the flow of the street as it had always been. There was no announcement, no clear ending, only the quiet continuation of everything around him. And as the space where it had all unfolded returned to its ordinary stillness, what remained was not the moment itself, but the weight of what had been seen, carried forward not in noise, but in silence, where it would stay, unchanged, long after the street had forgotten everything else.